Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corn. We've talked about aviation on a number of podcasts, and for those of us who are nervous flyers, it's thankfully one fear that I don't have. It doesn't really bother me, but my wife has become a bit more sensitive about this in recent years, and that is turbulence during flight. So we've probably all watched one of those 3-minute explanations on YouTube about Clear Air Turbulence or CAT and what causes it. And we've heard kind of reassuring things along the lines of, well, it feels like it's really shaky up there. But if you look at the that instrument in the cockpit that shows how the plane is actually doing, it's not bouncing around anywhere near as much as you kind of feel like it is. We've also heard that turbulence is categorized according to, mild, medium, or severe. And most of us have actually probably never been in a patch of severe turbulence. It's unusual. The other thing that we might have heard about turbulence that's reassuring is when you look out the window of the plane when it's going through a patch of rough air, is the preferred euphemism seems to be now, and you see the wings kind of flexing up and down a bit. And that's actually by design. The fact that they are flexible makes them more stable. And you can watch these amazing videos of the aircraft being stress tested, and you'll see exactly how much those wings can actually bounce around while staying on the airframe. It's pretty amazing stuff. So cumulatively, it's a lot of comforting information. Most turbulence isn't that bad. It's well within the physical limits of what the airframe is able to handle. But for a lot of people, that doesn't make it much less scary. The other thing that I think makes people nervous is occasionally when planes fly through severe turbulence, that's when stuff can happen, like the overhead compartments can open and fall on people, and you might actually get real injuries that turns into an emergency that the plane has to divert, land, and get those people medical attention. And there's a feeling that those incidents have been happening more frequently in recent years. Now, I know that aviation is an incredibly data and safety oriented industry, and I'm sure that these incidents of severe turbulence are tracked such that we can determine from year to year whether there's more or less turbulence happening. So that's what I'd love to talk about today, Herman and Corn, is turbulence and the severe type of turbulence that causes these incidents becoming a more common phenomenon. And what would you say to someone who is afraid of turbulence? The other thing I think we've all probably wondered is, if we think about the worst turbulence we've ever experienced as a passenger, I've had one or two flights that I can think of that were really pretty rocky. And, your stomach kind of goes up as a plane drops altitude or feels like it's dropping altitude. And we all probably wonder if we could be a fly on the wall and look at the cockpit. Would we see the pilots just like, chilling out, reading a newspaper, whatever they do during those many hours of cruising, which we should probably talk about in a separate episode. One of the mysteries I think travelers have also wondered. The plane's on autopilot. What are those guys doing for all that time? But basically, for experienced airmen and our women who've been all over the world, do they really never get scared when the plane starts rocking? Herman and Corn, let's talk about the phenomenon of clear air turbulence. Is it getting worse, or are we just flying more? What's the true story? Over to you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I'm Corn, and as always, I'm joined by my brother Herman.
Herman Poppleberry, at your service. Coming to you from our slightly drafty living room here in Jerusalem.
It is a bit chilly today, isn't it? But we've got a topic that is definitely going to heat things up. Our housemate Daniel sent us a voice note this morning. He mentioned that his wife has been getting a lot more anxious about flying lately, specifically because of turbulence.
It is a very real phenomenon, Corn. We have seen some harrowing headlines over the last year or two. Daniel was asking if this is just a case of better reporting in social media, or if the skies are actually getting angrier.
Right. He wanted to know if severe clear air turbulence is becoming more common, what we should say to the nervous flyers out there, and this was the interesting part, if the pilots themselves ever actually get scared when the plane starts bucking.
Oh, that is a fantastic question. I have actually been diving into the latest atmospheric research on this, and the short answer is yes, the data is starting to back up that gut feeling a lot of travelers have. The skies are changing.
That is a bit ominous, Herman. But before we get into the why, let us talk about the what. Because when most people think of turbulence, they think of flying through a big dark thunderstorm. But what Daniel is talking about, clear air turbulence, or CAT, is a different beast entirely.
Exactly. It is the invisible enemy. If you are flying through a storm, the pilot can see that on the weather radar. They see the moisture, the convection, the red and yellow blobs on their screen, and they fly around it. But clear air turbulence happens in, well, clear air. There is no moisture for the radar to bounce off of. It is purely a result of wind shear. Rapid changes in wind speed or direction over a very short distance, usually near the jet stream.
And that is what makes it so jarring. One minute you are watching a movie and sipping a ginger ale, and the next, the floor literally drops out from under you. So, to Daniel's first question, is it actually getting worse?
It really is. There was a landmark study out of the University of Reading. Researchers like Paul Williams and Mohammed Fudal have been tracking this for years. They found that between 1979 and 2020, the total annual duration of severe turbulence over the North Atlantic increased by 55%. Studies from the University of Reading project, severe turbulence could increase by up to 82%, nearly double, by mid to late century under high-emission climate scenarios.
55% already, and potentially doubling? That is not just a statistical fluke.
Not at all. And it is not just the North Atlantic. We are seeing similar trends over the United States, Europe, and parts of Asia. Moderate turbulence went up by about 37%, and even light turbulence is up 17%. If you feel like your flights are bumpier than they were when we were kids, you are not imagining it. You are objectively spending more time in unstable air.
So what is the driver here? I assume this connects back to some of the climate trends we have discussed before.
It is the primary driver. Climate change is warming the troposphere, the lower part of the atmosphere where we live, but it is actually cooling the stratosphere, which is higher up. This increases the temperature gradient between those two layers.
Okay, so the temperature difference is getting steeper.
Exactly, and that temperature difference is what fuels the jet stream. When that gradient gets sharper, the wind shear in the upper atmosphere becomes more intense. The jet stream essentially becomes more fractured or chaotic. You get these invisible rivers of air moving at 300 kilometers per hour right next to air moving at half that speed. When a plane crosses that boundary, that is your turbulence.
It is like a boat moving from a calm lake into a raging river.
Perfect analogy. Except the river is invisible and moves in 3 dimensions. And because we are seeing more extreme heat trapped in the lower atmosphere, those rivers are becoming more turbulent.
We saw a really tragic example of this back in May of 2024, right? The Singapore Airlines flight SQ321. That one really shook the industry.
That was a watershed moment. One passenger unfortunately died, and over 100 people were injured. The plane dropped about 54 meters in just a few seconds. To put that in perspective for the listeners, that is about the height of a 15-story building. Just gone.
I remember reading the preliminary report on that. The gravitational forces, the g-forces, swung from positive 1.5 g to negative 1.5 g in a matter of seconds.
Think about what that does to a human body. At 1.5 g, you feel 50% heavier than you are. Then, a split second later, at negative 1.5 g, you are being thrown toward the ceiling with more force than gravity is pulling you down. If you are not buckled in, you become a projectile. That is why we saw those horrific photos of the ceiling panels being smashed. It was not the luggage, it was people.
It is a sobering reminder. Turbulence incidents have continued to make headlines in recent years.
Turbulence risks are becoming a state-level operational concern. In fact, turbulence is noted as a key risk area in ICAO's ongoing Global Aviation Safety Plan, reflecting increased industry focus.
So, let us pivot to the psychological side of this, because I think this is where Daniel's wife, and probably a lot of our listeners, are sitting. When the plane starts rocking, it feels like the wings are going to snap off. It feels like the pilots have lost control. Herman, do the pilots ever actually get scared?
I have talked to a few pilots about this, and the consensus is really interesting. Most experienced pilots will tell you they do not get scared in the sense of, we are going to die. They view turbulence the same way a professional driver views a very potholed road. It is annoying, it is a lot of work, and it is a major safety concern for the people in the back, but they are not worried about the plane falling out of the sky.
Why not? Because to a passenger, falling out of the sky feels like a very logical conclusion to severe shaking.
It is all about the engineering. Modern aircraft are built to withstand forces that are far, far beyond anything the atmosphere can throw at them. You know those wing flex tests you see on YouTube?
Oh, I love those. Where they pull the wings of a Boeing 787 or an Airbus A350 up until they almost touch above the fuselage.
Exactly. Those wings can flex more than 7 meters before they reach their breaking point. In even the most severe turbulence, the kind that sends people to the hospital, the wings might only flex a meter or so. The plane is basically a giant high-tech spring. It is designed to bend so it does not break. Pilots know this. They know the structural integrity is virtually absolute.
So what are they actually doing in the cockpit while we are all white-knuckling our armrests?
They are busy. They are checking their instruments, trying to find a ride report from other planes in the area. They are talking to air traffic control to see if there is a smoother altitude. They might be slowing the plane down to turbulence penetration speed, which is basically like a car slowing down to go over a speed bump. It reduces the stress on the airframe and makes the ride slightly less jarring.
But surely there is a limit. I mean, if the turbulence is so bad you cannot read the screens.
That is when it gets unnerving, to use a word I saw from a retired captain. If the vibrations are so intense that you literally cannot focus your eyes on the primary flight display, yeah, that is a bad day at the office. But even then, the autopilot is often doing a better job than a human could at maintaining the attitude of the aircraft. The pilots are not scared for their lives. They are scared for the cabin crew.
That is an important distinction. The people most at risk are not the ones with the gold stripes on their shoulders.
Exactly. The pilots are buckled in with 5-point harnesses. They are not going anywhere. But the flight attendants are often up moving heavy meal carts trying to secure the cabin. If you want to know if a pilot is genuinely worried, listen to their voice on the intercom. If they tell the flight attendants to take your seats immediately, that means they have seen something on the radar or heard a report that suggests things are about to get very real.
It is that transition from comfort turbulence to safety turbulence.
Right. Most turbulence is just a comfort issue. It is like driving on a gravel road. But severe CAT is a safety issue for anyone not tethered to the floor.
You know, we touched on aviation safety way back in episode 139 when we were talking about operational technology. But the human element here is so different. If I am a nervous flyer, what is the one piece of data or the one aha moment that can help me stay calm when the shaking starts?
For me, it is the Jell-O analogy. Imagine the airplane is a tiny toy stuck inside a giant bowl of Jell-O. If you tap the bowl, the toy jiggles. It might move up and down a few centimeters, but it is not going to fall. It is suspended in the medium. Air at 10,000 meters is not nothing. It is a fluid. It has mass and density. When the plane hits a bump, it is just reacting to a change in the fluid density. It is still being held up by the air. You cannot fall out of air any more than a fish can fall out of water.
I like that. It makes the air feel more substantial, more supportive.
And if you need a more technical aha, look at the stats. Despite the increase in turbulence, the number of fatal accidents caused by turbulence alone is incredibly small. Most injuries happen because someone did not have their seatbelt on. In the Singapore incident, virtually every serious injury was an unbelted passenger or crew member. If you are buckled in, even loosely, you are safe. The plane is your armor.
It is interesting you mention the armor aspect. We talked about digital vaults in episode 168, and while that was about data, the philosophy of hardening a system is the same. The airplane is a hardened system. It is probably the most over-engineered piece of equipment you will ever step foot in.
By a long shot. And the technology is trying to catch up to these invisible bumps. There is some really cool stuff happening with Lidar, light detection and ranging.
Oh, tell me about that. Is that like the lasers they use on self-driving cars?
Exactly. Companies like Boeing and agencies like JAXA in Japan have been testing airborne Lidar systems. Instead of radar, which needs water droplets to work, Lidar fires a laser beam ahead of the plane. It measures how that light scatters off of tiny dust particles and air molecules. By analyzing the Doppler shift in that reflected light, a computer can actually map the wind speed and direction up to 17 kilometers ahead of the aircraft.
So it gives the pilots a heads up for the invisible stuff?
Precisely. It could give them a 60 to 90 second warning. That does not sound like much, but it is enough time to get the flight attendants in their seats and tell everyone to buckle up. Currently, it is a bit too heavy and expensive for every plane to have one, but as the technology shrinks, it is going to become standard.
That would be a game changer for the nervous flyers, just knowing that the invisible is becoming visible.
We are also seeing much better crowdsourced turbulence reporting. Airlines like Emirates are now using AI-based platforms that use machine learning to map turbulence in real time. Apps like Turbly or the systems integrated into the cockpit now share real-time eddy dissipation rates, that is, the technical measurement of turbulence between planes. If a plane 5 minutes ahead of you hits a patch of severe, your pilot knows exactly where it is and can ask for a different altitude before you even get there.
So, to circle back to Daniel's question for his wife, the why is climate change, the how is increased wind shear, but the so what is that we have better tools and stronger planes than ever before.
Right. And I think it is worth mentioning that while we talk about these scary events, they are still statistically rare. We fly tens of thousands of flights every single day. The vast majority of them land without a single person being jostled enough to spill their coffee.
It is the availability heuristic, isn't it? We remember the one video of a cabin in shambles because it is dramatic, but we forget the 50 flights we have taken that were perfectly smooth.
Exactly. And hey, if you are enjoying these deep dives into the stuff that keeps us up at night, or in this case, keeps us buckled in, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other curious minds find the show.
It really does. We've been at this for 325 episodes now, and the community feedback is what keeps us going. We love hearing from you guys.
Absolutely. We are actually planning to do a follow-up on what pilots do during those long cruise hours, the mystery of the cockpit, in a future episode, so stay tuned for that.
I am looking forward to that one. I have always wondered if they are just playing Sudoku up there.
Some of them probably are corn. Some of them probably are.
Well, Herman, I think we have given Daniel plenty to take back to his wife. The skies might be a little more active, but the armor we are flying in is more than up to the task.
Just keep that belt fastened, even when the sign is off. It is the simplest, most effective piece of safety tech ever invented.
Wise words from Herman Poppleberry. Thanks for joining us today on My Weird Prompts.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and the contact form if you want to send us a prompt like Daniel did.
And we are on Spotify and all the major platforms. Until next time, keep asking those weird questions.
And keep your seatbelts low and tight. See ya.
Bye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.